And Naomi Wolf comes back today for an update with us. She, of course, best-selling author, columnist, professor, very influential feminist writer, Rhodes Scholar, a graduate of Yale, doctorate from Oxford. 8 best-selling works, including The Beauty Myth, Give Me Liberty, The End of America, founder and CEO of the company dailyclout.io. Follow her at Naomi Wolf on Twitter. And of course, first up is going to be Brandon Weichert. Brandon is a 1945 senior editor. He's a former congressional staffer, a geopolitical analyst, contributor to the Washington Times and the Asia Times, author of Winning Space, How America Remains a Superpower. He's going to talk about China's race to control life and what that means. So let's get to our 2 great guests.
Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want to help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
I suspect you've seen Susan and I gushing over Paleo Valley products. We love the taste and how well they fit into a paleo-based nutrition regimen. They're delicious, and we use them for travel all the time. But there's more. We are huge fans as well of Paleo Valley's grass-fed bone broth protein. It comes in 3 flavors, unflavored, vanilla, and chocolate. It's a powder you can add to really anything. We add it to coffee literally every day. Smoothies, baked dishes, just hot water, dissolves really easily. The bone broth protein is made with 100% grass-fed and finished bones that are free from pesticides or antibiotics and are slow simmered to extract as much collagen as possible. As we age, collagen breaks down. That's what wrinkles are. And research shows that there are significant benefits to adding a collagen source in your diet. I don't think it's too much to say it's changed our lives. And Susan is now reporting that after drinking the bone broth for a few weeks, her hair is stronger and longer, and nails are stronger too. Try it for yourself. You can order at drdrew.com/paleovalley and use Dr. Drew at checkout to save an additional 15%. I think everyone knows the next medical crisis could be just around the corner, whether it comes in the form of another pandemic or something much more routine like a tick bite. You and your family need to be prepared. That's where the Wellness Company comes in. You know the Wellness Company. We have their physicians on, like Dr. McCullough, frequently. The Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy.
It's a safety net. It's an insurance policy
absolutely.
That you hope you're not going to need, but if you need it, you sure as heck are going to wish you had it if you need it.
Be ready for anything. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. The medical emergency kit provides a guidebook to aid in the safe use of all these life-saving medications. From anthrax to tick bites to COVID-19, the Wellness Company's medical emergency kit is exactly what you need to have on hand to be prepared. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next. Go to drdrew.com/TWC. That is drdrew.com/TWC to get 10% off today. Just click on that link. I neglected to give Brandon's particulars. You can find him at the Weichert Report, spelled Weichert. Also, let me see what this is. We the Brandon. All right, let's welcome We the Brandon into our show. Brandon, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
That's a fantastic handle. We the Brandon. So, and Brandon, for those of you wondering. So China's race to biohack life itself. Just tell me what the premise of your theory is.
Yeah, so basically, biotechnology is the new industry that's getting ready to pop. It's going to do for this decade likely what computer technology did in the late 20th century, as you know, with your medical background. And with COVID, we now know that, this is the big industry everybody's wanting to get into. China has had its fingers in the biotech industry for many years, a decade at least, and they are actually starting to dominate the development of the medical technologies that we think we're going to need for the future. It's all happening in China, and they have no ethical or moral standard. And as it turns out, as I was working on the book, obviously COVID came out, and I was sort of writing about what was going on with COVID. It looks as though through research that the Chinese actually developed coronavirus in a lab through a gain of function experiment at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And then when you peel back the layers more, you find out that American firms and research organizations have been partnering with Chinese biotech firms, not just on coronavirus gain of function experiments, but for a retinue of experiments. And as one leading Stanford bioethicist told me, the trump card to the Hippocratic Oath, which is to first do no harm, is cures. And so can we get cures faster out of China because they are willing to basically cut moral and ethical corners in ways that most Western nations are not willing to support? And so this book is really about the evolution of that industry in China.
Well, I mean, I think the simple answer to your rhetorical question there is yes, they can get around a lot of things, particularly if it serves the party or if it serves the collective. Absolutely. They have a different moral compass, right? If it's good for the whole, it doesn't matter how many get sacrificed. Right. But, we have a case study of precisely the excesses with the only human that I'm aware of application of CRISPR technology came from a scientific scientist who was bewildered when he was dressed down a bit by the international community for just going ahead on his own and inserting genes into a twins. Now, the Chinese government, correct me if I'm wrong, did take him down a bit, but I always wondered if that's just for appearance sake, while the while under the hood doing their own thing with CRISPR.
Right. So the doctor you're referring to is He Jiankui, and he basically used CRISPR-Cas9, which is the gene editing tool that we in America created to map the human genome. It's what we use to basically go in and gene edit for getting rid of unwanted diseases or whatnot. It's what mRNA vaccines are based off of, using that technology. And this Dr. He in China decided to go in utero while these twins were still in their mother's wombs and gene edit HIV out of them. The twins were born healthy and without any incidence of HIV. The issue was MIT Technology Review did a case study on them a year later and found that the twins' brains they're larger than the average brain. And we don't really know what that means because obviously they're still so young, these children. But the doctor in question was absolutely reprimanded by his government. But the real reason is, I think you're right, because what that did was it revealed what China's really doing with CRISPR-Cas9. And in the book, I talk about this concept that the Chinese military talks about openly in 2019, right after President Xi Jinping appeared in battle fatigues and declared a people's war on the United States. The leader of China's bioweapons program gave a speech in Beijing in which he started talking about using CRISPR-Cas9 to conduct what the Chinese military terms specific ethnic genetic attacks. So they're now talking about overtly the weaponization of CRISPR-Cas9, the technology we gave them. And they're going to use it on us. And they may have already done that with COVID as a proof of concept.
So I think you're going to have to tease that all out a bit and unpack what you just said to make sure people caught it. I caught it. I caught what you said, but I think you're going to have to make it explicit because it's a profoundly controversial thing to say. So I'm going to ask you to say it in detail.
Okay, right now, here we go. Basically, in 2015, the National Institute of Health, as well as the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, led by Dr. Anthony Fauci, were partnered with University of North Carolina. They were doing what's known as gain-of-function research on coronaviruses. And basically, that's where you take your average coronavirus and you basically weaponize it for vaccine research purposes. The Obama administration ordered the NIH and Dr. Fauci to put the kibosh on it because they feared if it ever got out of the lab that it would be a pandemic and they would be blamed politically for it. So what happened was Dr. Fauci saluted and said, yes, sir, I'll terminate these experiments. But he didn't tell anybody that he was going to hand off all of the research and funding for that program over to the Wuhan Institute of Virology through a third party, a nonprofit known as the EcoHealth Alliance, led by a guy named Peter Daszak and Ralph Barrick. And they handed it off to Dr. Shi Zhengli, who's better known as the Bat Woman of Wuhan. And she was the foremost expert in China on taking horseshoe bat coronaviruses and doing gain of function tests on them. So she basically led the way over all those years to weaponize coronaviruses ostensibly for quicker vaccine research. The fear among the scientific community was, hey, look, we already had SARS. We already had the bird flu. There was MERS, which is a similar illness affecting the Middle East. Eventually, we're going to have a pandemic, and it's probably going to emanate from a coronavirus. Unbeknownst to the Americans who were funding and supporting this project for vaccine research was the fact that Shi Zhengli was cooperating with, because she's part of the People's Liberation Army. And the People's Liberation Army in 2015, their senior PLA Air Force medical personnel got together and wrote a proposal for President Xi Jinping in which they explicitly outlined how they could weaponize coronaviruses, deploy them against a targeted country like the United States to collapse that country's medical and economic system for strategic political effects that would redound to the benefit of China. And if you look at what happened with COVID-19, that is precisely what ended up happening here in the United States. We basically shut down our system. We terrorized each other and our own people in the name of pandemic protocols. And then we overthrew the government in a very nasty election that's still disrupting the status quo here in terms of societal peace. Meanwhile, China was able to use that time. And of course, they were damaged as well, but not politically. Xi Jinping is more powerful today than he was before the pandemic. And it looks like he's ramping up, I think, for a big strike on Taiwan a lot sooner than my pals at the Pentagon want to admit to.
You also, we've heard this story before from Li Meng Wan, who's a virologist who has run away from Hong Kong after being told she would be disappeared for digging into some of the same materials. But you said something you evidently have glossed over, that they were weaponizing these viruses. And by the way, we also talked to Ralph Martin. I'm sorry, is that David Martin, about David UNC Martin. and Ralph Barrick, and this goes back a long way. I mean, you told us the more recent chapter of this story, but the reality is it goes back into the 90s perhaps. And so there's a lot of history for us to learn from here. Is that chronicled in your book? I'm sorry, I've not read the book yet.
That's okay.
And so go ahead, finish your thought.
I was just going to say the 90s, that aspect I only mentioned a little bit. The real focus was on what China's doing with weaponizing pretty much all of biotech against us. So the COVID is a part of the story, but the really scary stuff, Dr. Drew, is coming down the line. It's not even, hasn't hit us yet. They haven't deployed it yet, but they're working on it. And I talk about that in the book.
Well, I want to know more about what that is, but first I want to parse out this one piece that you've glossed past that is highly controversial, which is you said that they're weaponizing viruses and infectious agents to be ethnically specific, to be able to perhaps not strike Chinese, biologically Chinese individuals, but hit people of a different ethnic origin. Tell me more about that. And by the way, I expect I expect this to have a huge reaction. So either way, people are going to agree or disagree with you. I just want to hear what you have to say.
Right, absolutely. So the Beijing Genomics Institute is China's largest state-run biotech company. and they have been developing the world's largest gene bank. Basically, when you're a geneticist, I'm married to one, so I know from her, when you are a geneticist, you're almost like a computer program when you're playing with the data in the lab. It's instead of ones and zeros, it's our DNA that you're computing. And so you put all that information of an individual or a group of people into a data bank, and then you can sometimes use artificial intelligence to help you, but you can start identifying patterns in groups of people, patterns of disease and trajectories, and what is one group's likely to be more affected by than others. And you can even now, with the way they're developing CRISPR-Cas9 capabilities, and this is where specific ethnic genetic attacks come into play, you can even now start to develop pathogens that would only affect one or two people specifically. And the Chinese very much want to create sort of, for lack of a better term, surgical bioweapons. And they're using this gene bank. The first group they're testing it on is the Muslim Turkic Uyghurs in western Xinjiang, which is part of China near the Afghanistan's border. There's a few million Uyghurs who have been put into concentration camps run by the Chinese government. And the first thing those poor people are made to do is forcibly hand over their genetic samples, which is then collated in that BGI-led gene bank. And what the Chinese military is doing is they're trying to figure out, is there any way they can tailor a plague that would wipe out the undesirable masses in China who are not ethnic Han Chinese, which is the dominant group in China. And then they're going to take that capability, they're going to, after they use it on their own people, they're going to scale that out, and they're going to start refining the methodology and using it on their enemies overseas, notably the Americans. And I fear that they've already gained critical access to our proprietary genetic information. BGI has a share, if I'm not mistaken, in 23andMe, which is what we use to find out our ancestry. You spit into a vial, send it away, and then the geneticist there figures out where your family's from. Well, that data is not destroyed. It's stored in the BGI gene bank for them to manipulate for further scientific and military purposes. Another thing also, BGI in 2013 bought a genomics company in Mountain View, California, that had exclusive access to the U.S. National Institute of Health as well as the Centers for Disease Control genetic databases. The Committee for Investment in the United States, CFIUS, was unable to prevent that purchase in time, and BGI in that year, they got a hold of all of that proprietary taxpayer-funded American genetic information, and they sent that over into their gene bank. So they now have the genetic information of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans, and they've been playing with it for at least 7 years, doing God knows what.
Now, I will preface what I'm about to say by acknowledging that because I'm involved with some medical research, I have been aware that the center of gravity of medical research generally has moved towards China and towards England too, believe it or not, but certainly towards China. And the one thing that I've sort of taken away from, or I'm sort of ruminating about, maybe is a better way of saying it, as it pertains to the history we're talking about here, of the layers of involvement and intrigue, and how research has been sort of continued by getting around the spirit of the law and all these. The point I'm making is, it seems like we have participated in all of these things as much as China has, number one. And number two, I'm beginning to think there's espionage and counter-espionage and layer upon layer of everybody watching what everybody's doing. So the question would then be, are we doing the same thing? And if not, why not?
We probably are to some degree, but unfortunately, we tend nowadays to not really get creative with counterintelligence. We're busy searching for Russian ghosts under Mar-a-Lago beds more than we are interested in actually stopping China from dominating the next frontier of the high-tech sector. Something to consider is just how intimately involved our government's research arms have been in helping China not only gain access to CRISPR-Cas9, but then also to fund them to do these medical research experiments, thinking that, oh, they're just going to get to vaccines faster and we'll get the benefits of that sooner, not realizing there's an undercurrent. In China, it's called military civil fusion, MCF. And basically, it is where there is no difference in between the military industrial centers and the civilian industrial centers. So what the civilians are working on for peacetime research is it's called dual use. It's easily shifted over to military purposes. We see this in every high-tech domain, whether it be space or biotech. This is what they're doing. And the Americans, our FBI under Trump started to catch on and started to issue warnings and started to try to do some counteracting measures to stop it. But under Biden, first thing that President Biden did was shut down the China shop at the FBI that President Trump had established to go after Chinese high-tech espionage directed against the United States. So the government is completely blinded to what's going on. And what's more, what I found is that many of our senior scientists in government are actually actively working with the Chinese. There was a gentleman named Dr. Charles Lieber, who was the leading nanoscientist for the Department of Defense. He really pioneered so much with nanoscience. Turns out from 2012 to 2019, he was secretly running a covert lab in Wuhan, part of China's 1,000 Talents program, which is their official program for attracting American and Western talent in science fields into China to basically do the research there. In fact, when my wife was at Yale doing her PhD in genetics, nursing and genetics, they attempted to get her to come to Wuhan in 2014 and do her genetics research there rather than at an American company. And one of the offerings they made to her was, hey, we'll pay off your student debt as a bonus, as a signing bonus. And, as she said, had she not been, with me, she probably would have gone over because she didn't know anything about national security. But this is the perniciousness of the way that the Chinese are operating. If they can't create it indigenously, they attract Western talent and funds, and they do it through very, nefarious ways. And our government isn't stopping it. They're not even really aware of it until it's too late.
Right. And I am acutely aware that the scientific community, the medical community was in massive denial about that,
Yes.
that cohesion of the military and civil research, and the coziness amongst medical researchers in the West and China is still difficult to unravel. I think people are having difficulty believing that their peers are somehow adulterated because they're so used to trusting them and developing good research with them, but no sense of where that could go awry. So A, respond to that, and B, where did you get all this information?
Well, so the first thing I'll say is, when people are surprised, just think of Wall Street going back to the 70s, deindustrializing the United States and handing it over to communist China, and then convincing themselves and everyone else that by doing so, they're turning China into our friend, and open free trade, a rising tide will lift all boats. Of course, we learned the hard way that's not what happens at all. So the medical community in America is sort of dominated by similar utopian notions of open science will make greater, amity between the two possibly warring countries of China and America. It won't. It just empowers China's war machine. Where I got this from, I have a background in national security policy. I worked on the Hill doing NatSec policy, and then I transitioned into a consulting role where I focus on what's known as geotechnology, so the confluence of high tech and national security. And I've gotten to know many people in the intel community. Most of my sources were on background because these are active senior members of the U.S. and British intelligence services. And then I kind of rolled up my sleeves and did old-fashioned, LexisNexis medical database papers research, and I found a lot of really, really frightening stuff about openly what Western scientists are doing with Chinese firms, biotech firms, to develop in China these different biotech capabilities that are really ghoulish. And if they're not stopped and better regulated, COVID's going to look like a picnic compared to what's going to happen next.
Well, that's what I want to talk about next. Speaking of next, is what these sort of what the oncoming train is. But before we get to that, I want to bring Naomi Wolf in here because, as you know, her husband is very involved, and he is he has radicalized my wife as Naomi has. Susan, you want to comment about that? About your radical nature there as it pertains to the Chinese Communist government?
I know. I think we're bringing over the dark side now.
Me?
Drew. Yeah.
No, I'm looking at the history here. I'm just looking at what we know, and I'm listening and I'm learning.
I don't know a lot. I just have interest in it.
Yeah, and it's people we've spoken to have this isn't the first time we're hearing these stories, and so there's something here. All right, let's what we'll do is we will bring Naomi Wolf in after the break, and we'll have her talk about her sense of what that something is, and then Brand, you're going to tell me what the oncoming train is, okay?
Okay.
All right, we'll be right back after this. I want to share with you a teeth whitening system that goes beyond merely enhancing your smile. Primal Life Organics Real White Teeth Whitening System offers convenience and rapid results without harsh chemicals. Light, blue light for whitening, red light for gum and oral hygiene, and you can just do both if you wish. Works naturally, promoting gum healing, tooth remineralization, gives you a brighter and a healthier smile. Again, no peroxide involved. Consistent usage yields remarkable results. Take this opportunity to transform your smile and at the same time, optimize your oral health. Aim for 5 times a week for the best outcomes. Discover more about this remarkable teeth whitening system and other products at drdrew.com/primal today. That again is drdrew.com/primal. Be sure to use that link for 60% off. drdrew.com/primal. Do it today for 60% off. There are 3 steps to great looking, glowing complexion in the summer. Of course, apply sunscreen, stay hydrated, and use the amazing skincare products from our friends at Genucel. Most retinol creams are not recommended for sunlight, but Genucel's Ultra Retinol uses a powerful plant extract retinol. It's an alternative called bakuchiol, which helps the skin stay hydrated, smooths out fine lines without harsh side effects, and it is safe to use outside under your sunscreen. Genucel works so well, you can see the results in this unplanned live moment on our show when the Redness Repair Cream repaired my skin in just minutes right before your eyes. And Susan and I love Genucel so much, we created our affordable bundles at up to 72% off of our favorite products at genucel.com/Drew. And just for the summer, every subscription includes a customized summer spa gift box, absolutely free.
I know I'm a snob about the products I use on my face. Everybody knows it. Every time I go to the dermatologist's office, they're just rows and rows of different creams. And then when I get to the counter, they're overpriced. All kinds of products that you can all find at genucel.com.
See what's in our bundles. Get ready to show off your summertime skin. Go to genucel.com/Drew. That's GENUCEL.com/DREW. Genucel.com/Drew. And remember to use the code Drew at checkout for extra savings. Let's bring our friend Naomi Wolf in here. You can follow her at dailyclout.io, and Twitter is, of course, Naomi Wolf, NaomiWolf. And Naomi, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me back. Glad to be with you again.
I want to tell you on a lighter note before we get into the scarier stuff, and I hope Susan will be able to hang around for a little while to hear some of this, which is I recently did a couple interviews with Whitney Cummings, and the comedian Whitney, and she went nuts when she found out that we were friends. As it literally, she was saying, I literally base my life was organized around the feminine mystique and around Naomi Wolf, and she would kill to meet you or talk to you. So let's set that up after we do all this, if that's okay with you.
Lovely. Thank you. Love that.
You bet. She's a great person. The Body of Others is the current work of Naomi Wolf. Check it out. It pertains to much of what we've been talking about here today. It's sort of more of the stateside, domestic issues, and what we are doing with ourselves with these new biological realities. I'll give you a chance to react, as I said, to start this conversation out. What is that something that's going on here from your perspective?
Well, what Brandon kind of brilliantly put out really maps so perfectly, and I know you know this, with what I've been seeing and reporting, without the depth of knowledge at all that he has about China. I've been reporting little bits of it as they affect the United States, not so little. I mean, the biggest thing I want to remind your audience is that I contributed is finding that the Pfizer injection is manufactured in an MOU with the Chinese Communist Party, with Fosun Pharmaceuticals, that is basically run by the Chinese Communist Party, a senior level CCP official. And Brandon couldn't be more right. And I know this from the legendary Brian O'Shea as well, my husband, who's as equally obsessed with China for good reason from a national security perspective, that that China is waging warfare on us, unrestricted warfare, as I think Brandon mentioned, and that this injection made with the Chinese Communist Party, as Brandon pointed out, there is no such thing as civilian military separation. So what a pharmaceutical company does with this injection serves the People's Liberation Army of China. They're the same thing. They've created 1 billion extra doses. They're not going to China. They're going to Western Europe and North America. And China, in a link that is now dead, I reported on it some months ago, opened 14 manufacturing plants in Western Europe and 2 in the United States, one in Andover, Mass, and one in Princeton, New Jersey. And in 2021, the SEC filing for Pfizer-BioNTech, which manufactures this injection, is transferred the IP, the intellectual property, to China. And it says it right there in the SEC filing. It doesn't say a Chinese individual. It doesn't say a Chinese company. It says to China, to the nation of China. So what that means, and the other piece of evidence I'd like to remind you all about, and you can see this on my essay, Facing the Beast, on my Substack, is that Hong Kong, and again, Hong Kong is under the dominion of the Chinese Communist Party now, scientists in 2021 did an experiment in which they showed that the first mRNA injection into mice caused some serious damage, but the second injection caused catastrophic damage and caused the kinds of things that people of whom I have direct knowledge, who, young adults who are getting heart transplants now, their hearts are enlarged and they have these calcifications, or these I guess calcifications is the best word, these white patches on their hearts. And that's what happened to these rodents as well. And then there was catastrophic organ failure. So what I'm saying is why the first boost, the second boost, the first injection, second injection, first boost, second boost, and they're coming again, in this wave of propaganda about this new variant. The FDA advisory panel approved in advance in June, future boosters without even having safety data or knowing what was in them, right? Then we had the wave of AI-generated journalism, which we're in the middle of right now, saying, oh my God, an uptick here, this new variant, it's called Eris, which, interesting, is the goddess of discord and disruption. It's now Rutgers is mandating it. Now schools are closing in Georgia. And you get this kind of drip, 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 which again, people really need to understand that AI now runs journalism. So that's not, that kind of mounting incremental horror is not something that organically happens with like human publishers making human decisions. This is AI ramping up the fear, ramping up the anxiety. Maybe you should bring back masks. Maybe you should wear 2 masks. Maybe children should not be going back to school. And then in mid-September, predictably, and if you go back to my appearances recently, I said, next is the rollout, right? Predictably, the new formulation is available. Again, no double-blind studies showing that it's safe, and then will come mandates. So all of that is ready, and what people have to understand is by the 3rd or 4th or 5th dose, I mean, like this material, whatever is in the new formulation, we know that it's going to have some of the lethal ingredients of all the other formulations, which are lipid nanoparticles, the adjuvant, right? Polyethylene glycol, which coats lipid nanoparticles, mRNA, and spike protein. And we know that it's cumulatively, these lipid nanoparticles don't leave the body. We've talked about this. So every time you get a new injection, you're loading more of these industrial fats covered in a polyethylene glycol, which is an antifreeze, this petroleum product, into your ovaries, into your liver, into your spleen, into your adrenals. And this is where they accumulate, into your brain. And so what the CDC found, or what my husband found in lawfully obtaining this document from the CDC's internal database, lawfully, is that there have always been plans for 6 injections. And what I'm saying, from having overseen this project in which 3,500 medical and scientific experts have read through the Pfizer documents and now produced almost 80 reports about how fatal and damaging and destructive to reproduction and just catastrophically bad for your nervous system, your liver, your kidneys, your heart, your circulation. Just to end this riff, I promise, multiple injections are a bioweapon.
So I have a billion questions now. Why would they, where did these 6 injection information come from, and why would they target 6? That makes zero sense to me. Was that an expectation that they would need 6? Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I shouldn't jump in, but what I'm asking, everything makes sense if you invert your expectations. Nothing makes sense if doctors are acting like doctors and hospitals are acting like hospitals, and the White House is acting like the White House and the FDA is acting like the FDA. Because all of that would suggest that the goal is to heal people and to save them. So none of this makes sense under those circumstances, right? Why would you have a spreadsheet that anticipates 6 injections? You don't even know if there are going to be 6, COVID waves, right? When the spreadsheet was obtained. Now, if you turn the hourglass upside down and you listen to what Brandon and Brian, all of us are saying, and others, people smarter than I am, like, General Spalding and China watchers, now consider that war is being waged against us, and that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't wage war the same way that we in the West think war is waged, with armies and invasions and bombs. They wage it through subverting our institutions, through buying up our farmland, through buying up our water resources, through owning, Brian taught me this, the energy grid. All of this green stuff, which I thoroughly thought I supported, is made in China, solar and wind. And so they now own our grid if we shift to an all green, no fossil fuel energy grid. Brandon talked about a database. I once went through a CVS and did one of those PCR tests for COVID, and did a video that showed the package has no English lettering on it. It's only Chinese. And so my DNA, which is now on this swab, like, where do those swabs go, right? They are adding, and this was confirmed by one company in California, which was harvesting people's DNA through this nasal swabbing. Why the testing, the mandatory testing? Great way to harvest DNA. Where do the sharps go? All these injections, where do the sharps go? I mean, China has made no secret that it wants to own the world's database of DNA and be the world's kind of medical gatekeeper by the year 2030. And Brandon's absolutely right. These people harvest organs of dissidents. They put people in quarantine camps. They solder people, if they are infected, into their homes. They force abortions on women. They have no, and I'm not talking about Chinese people, obviously, I'm talking about the leadership. This Communist Party has no limit to the way it will wage war, even on its own people. So now they're waging war on us. So then it makes sense. You get a little bit sick with the first one. You get sicker with the second one. You have catastrophic symptoms. None of the doctors are going to tell you what they are, because I found out through Dr. Jim Thorpe that $11 million went to one medical organization to lie to people, the most vulnerable people, about the dangers of the injections. And these contracts, and they found many of them in the CARES Act, are written so that the doctors and the medical organizations have to give the money back if they don't follow the HHS script. So now you understand the fifth one, the sixth one, you're dead or dying, or you can't reproduce, or you're in a wheelchair, or you're thoroughly disabled. And Ed Dowd has shown the scale, using government databases and insurance databases, of disabilities of working age Americans just now with just 2 injections. Why do we think they're going to stop there? The goal is to get us to be geopolitically, right? I'm not a doctor. I'm a political analyst. I was a political consultant. Geopolitically, it makes perfect sense. You give people 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 of these injections over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. You have an America in which the leaders are dead or hurt. The next generation is dead or hurt. Women are not able to reproduce. And I have, even more horrific data since I last spoke to you about that. So easy to roll right in, or to pour in from Canada, or to come up through Mexico. So easy to take over the United States, or to, what is there to take over? I mean, there'll just be a change in administration. Right now, our administration is wholly captured by China. We know that from Hunter Biden's laptop. It'll just be a more obvious ownership of our White House and of our institutions, and we'll be too weak to fight back.
Well, this would be the appropriate time to bring Brandon back and have him react to what you've just laid out. Brandon, your reaction to all this?
I think Naomi's 100% correct. And I think that, the situation is worse than I think anybody understands. I know that it is, because when I go up and I serve as an occasional subject matter expert, the generals I talk to sit and they're confounded, and inevitably it's usually the major and colonel level that will come to me and say, well, we're seeing the same things too, but we can't get command to pay attention because they're political. They're taking political orders, not military orders. And so there is this suspension of our ability to respond because nobody in power wants to believe. Because it's when you think about it, it's so frightening. You almost wish it weren't true. It is.
Yeah, this is hard to listen to. What's the counter argument to all this? If somebody is concerned that you're overreacting or that this is apocryphal in some way, what do people say?
They say that I'm an anti-China bigot, and they primarily tried to speaking and. In 2020, January, right as the pandemic was happening, I was giving my usual talk to a group of special forces operators in a base in Florida. And the colonel there didn't like what I was talking. I was talking about the genetic origins of COVID at the time. I believe it was in France. They were getting early genetic samples of the disease, and it was this chimeric disease. And I said that term, and the colonel there summarily booted me, banned me from the base for as long as he was in command. And the official complaint was that I made a homophobic slur because I said that there was elements of HIV in the pandemic's DNA, which of course there is. And so that's what they do when they don't like what I have to say. They just try to cancel me. But unfortunately for them, I'm not in their chain of command. I'm an outside consultant. I left government for a reason. And this is why. They can only just say, we don't want to use you anymore, Brandon. They can't do anything more to me.
Speaking of Florida, before I get Naomi's reaction, your internet is glitching a little bit, and for those of you watching right now live, he is the hurricane is about to hit landfall where he is. Yeah. So, are things okay there right now?
Yeah, it looks like it was the Chinese.
Well, it's funny. I give these interviews the last month. It happened with Dennis Prager a month ago, and they were joking with me after the show. Right when I started talking about China, it glitched out, but it's probably from the hurricane. Luckily, the hurricane's going to hit, well, not luckily, but too bad for them. It's going to hit 2 hours north of us. I think we should be fine.
And Naomi, I'll give you a chance to react to Brandon's comments there about what he's saying.
Well, I'm just agreeing with him, and glad that he's courageously forging ahead. His message is so important.
Are you getting pushback?
Are you kidding? I mean, of the Vanity Fair, did it?
Where is it? How does what form does it take? What form does it take, other than hit pieces that this is politically motivated in some way? What kind of do you feel as though the Chinese Communist Party is catching wind of this and coming after you, or where do you think the energy is coming from?
Well, I guess what Brian, whom I'm very influenced by on this issue, because of his expertise, his view would probably be, if he were here, that I'm not going to be attacked by a Chinese special operator, right? That they operate their influence, and they're aligned with the World Economic Forum, World Health Organization. Right. They operate, Bill Gates, they operate through cutouts, basically. So totally, to have the New York Times, The Guardian, and Vanity Fair all line up in a 2-week period, right when I report 69, this bombshell showing that the White House knew about this horrific 8-page report in Pfizer that is even worse than the last report I told you about injuring babies. It kills 2 babies. 2 babies die, and horrible injuries, 21% spontaneous abortion rate. This is sent to the White House, and Rochelle Walensky gives a press conference telling the pregnant women of America, that the vaccine is safe and effective for pregnancy and they should take it. So right when I report that, this wave of coverage designed to make me seem insane, because that's the theme of these stories, complete lunatic. That's not China. That's the influence of China on the White House. I mean, since you and I last spoke, the Missouri Attorney General has found through a FOIA and a successful lawsuit that the White House, the CDC, the FDA, the Bureau of the Census for some reason, and Twitter and Facebook colluded to single out my accurate tweet in June of 2021, warning women about menstrual problems subsequent to receiving mRNA injections. And so this whole smear campaign had the White House involved, which is scary, and DHS. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that's the cutout, right? That you don't need a secret Chinese agent, going after Naomi Wolf, because you've got our whole White House is captured, our FDA is captured, and so on. Our media are captured, and I trace the money flow in the bodies of others. And I guess, that's the pushback that I experience. Other pushback, as you know, I married my bodyguard, so I don't really, worry about physical threats, because he's out there taking care of that in advance for me and not telling me, luckily. But again, it wouldn't come directly. It would be through, through intermediaries. And we're all, like, everyone I know in the medical freedom movement is, what Brian says is it's too expensive these days to assassinate someone. He's not saying for him. He's saying that assassination or, injury is not the method of choice, that it's much more effective to engage in lawfare, for instance. And everyone I know, or delicensing or reputational attack, and everyone I know in the medical freedom movement or just the liberty movement is facing some version of that.
When you say the medical freedom movement, is that actually have a formal structure to it now? Are there people, specific leaders in that? No. So it's just people that are interested in people are interested in making their own decisions with their doctor, I guess, is what that really is at the core of that. Well, you guys, Susan, do you have any questions before you have to bail out? They've sufficiently upset me and scared me.
I know. Drew's like, oh, God, here we go.
Yeah,
it is a little nerve-wracking.
Well, my head is swimming with so many of these observations. Let's go back to the AI-generated journalism. Is that something that where is that playing out? I mean, I was at CNN for 10 years. It wasn't like the AI determine what the stories were every day. There was a 26-year-old line producer. I mean, that's what people don't understand. It's somebody fresh out of college that's feeding you the news typically, and they're going with whatever whatever the echoes are from their recent educational experience. And the AI, I'm assuming, is more on has to be more on the digital side. Where is that coming from, and how does it manifest?
Well, there are a lot of mysteries about it. But I did find a Bloomberg article that I included in the Bodies of Others that confirmed that AI is being used globally to basically write journalism. And what I don't know the methodology for that, but I do know, and as a former political consultant, I always look at historical events backwards, right? I look at the outcome, and then you swim upstream to try to see what the cause was. But the outcome you can see all around you. For example, don't go to Diwali, Thanksgiving, Passover, because you'll kill grandma, right? That meme, that piece of content was reproduced around the world in like hundreds of languages and dialects simultaneously. So like in Israel, people were saying, don't go to Shabbat because you'll kill grandma. In Britain, they were saying, don't go to Guy Fawkes Day because you'll kill grandma. And we were saying, don't go to Thanksgiving because you'll kill grandma. Human editors and publishers, as you know, Dr. Drew, can't do that around the world simultaneously. They don't coordinate with each other that way. They don't assign the identical story. They don't have the identical quote. AI can do that. Another example is, in what we're allowed to talk about, right? I mean, the new CEO of Twitter has said freedom of speech is not freedom of reach. So this is not exactly journalism, but Twitter and Facebook are the biggest platforms for news articles to get out to the public now. News outlets are very dependent on those platforms. So now, and she's acknowledging it, you can be dialed down if you're not like straight up deplatformed like I was. But if I'm dialed way down for a story for this, right? I mean, you do a version for YouTube and a version that's not for YouTube, as I recall, understandably, because YouTube won't let us talk about this, right? Well, there isn't some human being going through and say, oh, there's that Naomi Wolf again, and there's Dr. Drew, and they're talking about vaccines. That's AI picking up, certain words, certain patterns from the mass amount of content and dialing it down or blocking it accordingly. So that's a slightly different version of AI. But lastly, I'll just say, I just finished a new book. It's coming out in November, but I noticed that all of these articles had been updated, and they've been updated recently. So the original version of stupidity or of wrongness, or of saying you've got to wear your mask because it's effective, or these vaccines are effective, or the whole kind of discrimination apparatus of 2021 has gone into a memory hole. And all of these articles have been updated so that that's been erased now, partly probably for legal reasons, that all of these, there should be many lawsuits. I mean, people are suing people who mandated, suing people who discriminated, suing people who, closed the doors to education for their children. You can't find that anymore. And again, a human being can't go through and cut and change all of those articles in that way. Those are 3 examples.
That is very interesting. Let's spend the last few minutes sort of getting into solution, if there is one. Brandon, do you have sort of recommendations for how we respond to all this?
Yeah, so the first thing to understand is that while our government is both inept and compromised, it is not universally so. There are people that we can rely on, people who are elected, as well as the faceless men and women of the deep state. Actually, they aren't all bad people. And I have communicated, for instance, Senator Rand Paul. Until the pandemic hit, we were talking, his staff and I, with trying to change the definition of what a bribe is under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and basically reclassify tech transfers coming from US-based tech firms going to China as a bribe, because let's face it, that's what it is. And so one of the reasons that China is eating our lunch in technology generally, but specifically in biotech, is because our biotech firms and our investors and our innovators transfer technology as an opening bid to gain access, proprietary access often, to that massive Chinese market share. And the Chinese love when we do that. So if we could at least slow down that process, you will basically prevent a majority of that process from happening. They're not going to stop it all, because some of those firms are big enough where they can pay the fines and deal with the legal issues. But there's a lot of startups out there that can't afford that. And so by raising that risk level on them, you've just cut at least it by half their willingness to transfer technology and proprietary intellectual property to the Chinese biotech war machine. Another thing we need to do, I mentioned in our individual segment together, Dr. Drew, was the Committee for Investment in the United States, CFIUS. This is a component of the Department of Justice. They have to get everything right 100% of the time. And China is constantly throwing mud at them, trying to purchase real estate near sensitive military facilities, purchase real estate that has sensitive agricultural products that are grown there, that are trying to purchase U.S. tech firms. So they have to get it right all the time, and they just can't, because you can't catch it all. So what I propose doing is expanding the budget and the staff of CFIUS and giving it a wider scope so that it can not only detect the incoming Chinese attempts to buy our tech firms and buy access to our people, but that we can also then stop them en masse much better than we have. And those are two of the big things. The third thing I propose in the book, which you can now see behind me, the third thing that I propose is we get together, at least with our allies, preferably the rest of the world, but at least with the countries who align with us, and we create an international treaty that govern the safe use, research, and development of biotechnology from here on out. And we create standards and protocols for using CRISPR-Cas9 more responsibly. We're obviously never going to stop using it, but we need to use it more responsibly. It's like the Wild West right now when we deal with CRISPR-Cas9, and we need to really regulate that better. In the book, I talk about modeling it along the Trump administration's Artemis Accords for how we would govern development of the moon. Some things like that should be applied to the biotech sector generally, and specifically the use and proliferation of CRISPR-Cas9. And those three things will really, I think, slow down China's march toward biotech supremacy.
I see Naomi nodding on many things you were saying. I'm going to get her input in a second, but I want two quick follow-ups. It seems you didn't mention the military being involved with this. Since it is sort of framed as a war, it seems like there needs to be some sort of white paper from the military or something like that, where there's at least military-wide consensus about what's happening here.
Well, the elements of the intelligence community, particularly during the Trump administration, the FBI, John Ratcliffe, the former director of national intelligence, they got it. They got the problem. The issue was, as soon as Biden took over, like I said, one of the first things he did was to kill that FBI China shop that Trump had started.
So it could be restarted is the point. My other question is, you mentioned your connection with Rand Paul's operation. I'm going to ask you a question you may not be able to answer, and it may not be a fair question, but I keep hearing that he knows more than he's letting on, or that he talks about in many of these congressional hearings and things. Why is that?
Yeah.
Well, some of that has to do with classified, what he's getting access to from sort of the military side of biotech. And I really don't know. I don't know him that well. I know some of his staff. I used to work on the Hill. But I haven't, like I said, since the pandemic hit, I haven't had the kind of connections with them that I used to have. I do intermittently give them inputs for when they were questioning Fauci, for instance. But, I couldn't answer that decisively, but I do know that some of what he has access to is proprietary information, and he can't share it in a public forum, even though he's a senator.
Yeah, I was afraid of that, and it feels like, based on what we've all been hearing, that it's some of the same material we were talking about here today, and it's really
a lot of it's in
where
my
the rubber
book.
hit. It's where the rubber hits the road. But Naomi, if you would answer any information you have about Rand Paul, number one, and number two, go ahead and respond to my question about solutions.
Yeah, I don't have any information about Rand Paul, but I think it's a great question because to me, he seems clearly to be pulling his punches as well. I guess the solution to everything, in addition to what Brandon said, of course, is, from my point of view, always legislative. And your audience knows that we have something called BillCam, where you can share any state or federal bill and affect legislation. It's on dailycloud.io. I mention this because there are some really great bills already in the database, ready to go, ready to be passed, that need you guys to get behind them to help address some of this. For instance, there's a bill, as I recall, to stop China from buying farmland. There's another bill, as I recall, to stop China from buying land near military facilities. There are many, many bills to end emergency law and to stop mandates, forever, state by state. I mean, right now, people are terrified they're being brought back. Well, you pass a bill in your own state, which is pretty easy to do. We passed the 5 Freedoms Bill in 33 states, and your state cannot bring back mandates unless they repeal or override that bill. And no central bank digital currency, because that's going to be a feature of this. Not having, insisting on U.S. made solar and wind, for instance, if that's possible, to replace our grid going into the hands of China. In other words, if you search BillCam and China, you'll see a lot of really good bills that are there already. And I do think that what Brandon was talking about, which is, sending IP, and when you're saying that, it blew my mind because so many bills I've read have the U.S. taxpayers paying for the development of IP that then gets transferred. And I was like, why does anyone think this is a good idea? Why would taxpayers go for it? But now I know the answer. So, preventing the use of taxpayer funds for research and development that goes anywhere other than to, in the ownership of the U.S. taxpayer, essentially, or the government, essentially. I mean, why are we funding IP that is making tech companies rich and making other people rich when it's our money and our IP and then going to our enemies? These are just some ideas, but I guess what I want to say in conclusion is that if you don't see a bill there that you want to get behind and pass, you can draft a bill and let us know what you like. We want to draft Brandon's now. We'll draft it if we can raise a little money to hire our lawyer to draft it. That's how we do it. And then we can pass it. And I really want to pass this bill that Brandon described.
Is that on Daily Cloud, rather?
Yeah, if you go to BillCam, you can search any federal bill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. And I think I gave your Twitter handle incorrectly. It's Naomi R. Wolf?
Yes.
Okay. Final thoughts here, guys. Naomi, since you're up, I'll give you a last shot here.
I guess I just want to say to Susan, it's so awful. And to you, like, wrapping your brain around this is the hardest part, right? Because we've had such a wonderful life in this country, from the post-war period on, but all of our lifetimes. But we're not going to survive if we don't face what Brandon is saying and what Brian's been saying and what I've been saying and what General Spalding's been saying and so on. We owe it to our kids to recognize that this is 1933 and we have to see it.
Yeah.
Naomi, thank you so much. Brandon, your last comments?
The dawn is always darkest before. That's right. Get the
Buy
book.
The book.
That's the big one. That's right. But it's not hopeless. There are people, there are patriots out there, and we just got to stand together, or surely we will all hang separately. So, just stand together and keep fighting it, because the bad guys haven't won yet.
We will leave it at that, guys. Thank you so much. Fascinating conversation. And Naomi, we'll look for your new book as well. So we'll have you back here, of course, for that or any other new and breaking stuff. And Brandon, as you come up with new material, I hope you'll bring it here.
I would love to. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And for us, tomorrow, Ed Dowd is making another appearance. I think it's brief, I believe. He's part of as much of the way Naomi, or I guess as much the way Naomi is today. He'll be the second act after Aga Wilson. And unfortunately, Dr. Kelly will not be with us. But Ed apparently has some new data. In fact, Susan has been sort of toying with the idea of having Ed help host some of the shows, so maybe she can talk to him into that. On Thursday, Mark Changizi without Lionel, so we can actually get into stuff with Mark. He's a cognitive psychologist. Jeffrey Tucker coming back with Kelly on the 5th. September 6th, Joseph Fryman with Kelly. If you saw, please look at the previous interview we did with him. To me, maybe it's because he's a peer and he's such a clear thinker, some of his thinking and what he has uncovered through his research is some of the most startling reporting I have seen so far. And then John Phillips, September 13th. Candace Owens coming in on the 19th. Pierre Corey coming back with Kelly Victory on the 20th. So I think there's nothing more to say other than tomorrow, by the way, we'll be at noon Pacific time.
Yes.
So pay attention to that. And Caleb, something quick.
Yeah, something quick. People, you go look at Mark Changizi's tweets. And if you go on his recent tweets, he's been retweeting stuff that he posted back in March of 2020, literally almost word for word, all of the stuff that people are saying now about this being a big giant debacle on the way. He was saying like from day one, he's been saying the same stuff. I had no idea about that. So I'm really looking forward to that episode specifically on the 31st. That's going to be very interesting.
Oh yeah. He was one of the first to talk in detail about mass formation psychosis, and he framed all of his sort of observations based on the fact that that's what was going on. And so, yeah, he's been spot on from the beginning. So
very
Caleb,
far ahead of
specific
time.
You saw?
I mean, I was just going through and bookmarking ones. He was talking, he didn't have the words yet for mass formation psychosis, but he was specifically pointing to this is all being built on hype and fear. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. And some of these tweets are dated March of 2020. Like people were not thinking about it back then. And this guy was spot on in the early days. So it's going to, I have questions for him coming up too. I'm excited for that one.
Well, send me a couple of those and we'll make sure we sort of bring them up tomorrow on Thursday when he comes in here. But a reminder, tomorrow is noon. So please pay attention to that. Hang on one second. Emily Barsh is texting me. Yes, I'll tell. Yes, Kelly, of course, is absolutely fine. This is I guess people get nervous if Kelly misses any shows because of her recent diagnosis, but she's actually doing great. Not everything is going as absolutely perfectly with her, but there's just a scheduling issue and nothing more than that. So Kelly is great and will be, as I said, joining us again on a couple of shows the following week. So we appreciate you all being here. I've been watching you guys over in the Rumble Rants, been very active over there today, as well as on the Restream. And you guys are full of great comments and great chat and dialogue amongst yourselves there. We're monitoring all the time. So we appreciate your participation. We unfortunately had a technical problem with the Twitter Spaces today, or we might have been able to. Do you know what that was, Caleb?
I'm not sure. It wasn't China.
Must have been China.
What a strange coincidence that every time someone starts talking about China, we have weird glitches. Like I don't want to believe it, but now it's happened so many times.
Don't go there. Don't go there until really you have hard evidence. It's not. This correlation is not causation. So it's
true.
It's easier. There was also some. I get. There's a guy on Twitter I like following, Tim, the Real Truther or something like that, and he puts some interesting data up today about military findings and excess death. And I want Ed Dowd to take a look at that and see if because I'm starting to get confused again about what's really going on here. It's very hard to tell and how much is COVID and how much is vaccine. And I'm seemingly back to where I was some time ago. And I know to the dismay of the Rumble Ranters, I am now completely convinced that boosting up my elderly patients was the correct thing to do. I've not seen a single adverse event, though the current variant, by the way, I'm seeing quite a bit of the current variant. It is very intense. People are sick for about 3 days, and without treatment, they get better very, very quickly. There's no cytokine storm or anything, and everybody's been vaccinated or had previous infections, so it's almost impossible to find an immunologically naive individual now. So we're really talking about what's going on in the general population of people with vaccine and previous illness, and it's so it's getting more and more complicated to make conclusions. But in the general population, this variant is more infectious than the previous variants. And the previous variants, if they were not significantly altered in their infectivity by the vaccine, that means this may increase above baseline. So stay tuned for whether or not it actually means people are more likely to get infected or not. We need more data on that. All right, thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow at noon Pacific time. Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help. Anything I can do to increase my load size? How many times have we had this question? I have a 30-year-old healthy male. Even when I don't a day or two, I shoot pathetic small loads. Is there anything I do to increase it, or do I just have to accept it? Thanks, piss on me, beat me, but I'll be coming up in May. Hydration, levels of stimulation, prolonged stimulation, delayed ejaculation, all these things could increase it somewhat. But as I've explained many, many times, really, as much as anything, it's the size, the volume that is stored in the not in the balls.
In the liver.
Not in the liver. I don't know why I'm blanking the name of this. Show me the
epididymis.
No.
Epididymitis?
Show me the prostate and testes.
Semivesces?
Just the vasi deafes.
No. Just get me a. There it is.
Yeah, the semivesces.
No, to the right. Yep. There we are. The seminal vesicles.
Yeah, the semivesces.
Oh, okay, semivesces. Yeah. I thought you said the vasi deafes or something.
I mean, we said that too.
Yeah,
we were shooting our shot.
Ropes.
Shooting our loads.